All right, so diving right in with high jump approach construction here. I think one big thing that we always have to be aware of is just being precise. And high jump approach in general is going to be there's a lot more there's a lot more room for error compared to long and triple in terms of establishing a quality mark. So one thing that I'm big on is triangulating the approach. The vast majority of the meets that I go to, I don't see other schools doing that. And one thing I kind of pump up our athletes about is like their mark is not consistent. So you already have an advantage before you even start the event because your mark is going to be exact. We're going to triangulate it and make sure that you're in the right spot. So I'll go through that process here today. When you're first establishing the approach, one estimate that works pretty well directly from Bouchek's Nader, the amount out you go from the standard, so how far like outside of the standard you go, works. This works pretty well. Just what you predict the athlete will jump, multiply that by 2, and then add a foot. So if you have a 6-foot jumper, someone you project would jump 6 feet, you're going to go out 13 feet. And then the amount you go back, so away from the pit, you can just take their projection and multiply by 10. So if it's 6 feet, you go back 6 feet. And that puts them actually in a pretty good spot. All right, I have a different method that I've utilized over the years, and I'll share that. And it's consistent with at least guys, but you can kind of scale it down for girls if needed. So we'll talk about that as well. But another thing that I don't think is common is making sure that the out mark, all right, or what I'll refer to also as the bottom check mark, is collinear with the standards. At high school meets, like the setup is not consistent. So I'll see this oftentimes. All right, so this diagram here, where if this is just like on the apron of the track, I've seen it many times where the pits are not like parallel to this like kind of baseline of what would be like maybe the end of the end zone of the football field. So, but we still like measure out from that. So that's going to mess up the mark from that point forward. So ideally, the pits would be parallel with this line, but they're not always parallel. Okay, so I can promise anyone that ever comes to jump where we're at, like I take that into account. I make sure that is parallel. And it's something that I would strongly encourage anybody to make sure that you do as well, because that can really just jack up how far back you're going. All right. So if you have a scenario where that is the case, where the pits are just not in line with that apron, kind of, you want to make sure that you're pulling out parallel, or in line, collinear with the bar. Okay. And then you can use your triangulation to ensure that you're forming a right angle. It's hard. It's difficult. It's an optical issue, even no matter what the case is with that, if those pits aren't set up right. So it's going to be difficult for the jumper to kind of figure out where they're at. But that's something you can kind of practice. But just making sure that everything's in line here, collinear, so between this standard, and then that out mark is important. So what I'll typically do, and we'll get into this, is I'll pull the tape through the standard. So I'll start here. If the jumper's jumping from this side, I'll start by pulling through this standard to this standard, then out, and I'll just kind of make an arbitrary mark. So then I know once I make my out mark where this blue line is, I'm going to make sure that I pull through that mark. So I'll talk more about that, but that's something that I think is super important. Okay. So I'm going to jump to my other screen here, and I'll kind of go into that a little bit more. Okay, so going through like how I actually like to work through the approach. All of a sudden my stylus doesn't want to work. There we go. Okay. So starting with this collinear idea again, just to kind of give you maybe a little bit more of a visual of that. All right. This is what I was kind of referring to. I'm going to pull a line here to make sure that I am collinear with those standards. That way I'm going out in line with what those standards are presenting to me. So that's the first thing. Okay. And from there, all right, what I tend to do for our jumpers, so instead of using that, the Pythagorean triple, or I'm sorry, with that Boo formula, what I'll do, going back to here, is I'll put an X like right here. All right. And then go into this screen here, that X is right here, down at the bottom. All right. So I'll make sure that this is in line with that. Okay. So I might actually pull this through here, through that X. And then for the vast majority of my guys, I just say we're going to go 12 feet out. Okay. So using Boo's formula, that would be a projection of 5 feet 6, right? Because you're going to multiply that by 2 and add 1. So the vast majority of my guys are going to go 12 feet out. And then for certain ones that are going to be like 6 foot above, I'll just have them we'll still triangulate using this 12-foot mark, but then they'll just go a foot out once they actually find how far back they're going. So I'll explain that in a bit. All right. But the big thing that I do is just, I'm going to create a right triangle to make sure that I'm kind of in line with what the pit is presenting to us on that given day. All right. So this is the process that I'm going to go through. So I have that 12 feet out. All right. And then from there, we're going to go back. All right. And I go back where the tape measure to this point is going to say, so this is the tape measure is staying in line. So somebody is holding it here, actually. So what we'll do is someone will start holding it here and here. And then once this mark is established, they'll put a mark down on the runway. So there'll be a mark here. So then this person over here can stop holding that tape because this person here will continue holding. So you only really need 2 people for this. 3 is easier, but 2 is possible. All right. So then from there, the tape measure is still running from here to here. Okay. So the mark that will be established back here will be 48. The tape measure will say 48. Actually, I lied. I did this wrong. That would be excessive. Hold on one second. Come on. I have to switch styluses. So that should say 28. So 12 out, and then it'll be 16 back from that point to total 28. Is that clear so far? We good with that? Okay. All right. Then from there, we'll finish that right triangle off. Okay. And that'll be the 20 and the 48. So the length of the hypotenuse here is 20. And the measure of the end of the tape there will be 48. So that's going to form a right triangle. That's just a Pythagorean triple that we use. Why do we use that triple? Just because we go 12 out and then it's just a common Pythagorean triple multiple from that point forward. Okay, so 12 out is what we use. All right, if you were to use, like for girls, if you wanted to go 10 feet out, you could use a different triple if you like. Okay, so but that's just what we use. So we established that right triangle for everybody. Okay, so then what we know moving forward is once we have that triangle established, okay, the vast majority of my guys, again, at least at the start of the season, are going to be 12 feet out. So then, maybe they're going to be a certain amount back, right? So however far back they're going to be, they can just pull through this point and this point. So they'll just take the tape measure. It'll start down here. This is real quick. There we go. Okay. So the end of the tape will be down here, and then they'll just pull back. And so if you have a jumper that is, 48 feet back or whatever, they can make their mark at 48, and they're pulling through 2 points, so you know that it'll be in line. All right, so this is the first thing that we do when we get to a meet, is we establish that right triangle, and then everybody kind of pulls through. So what happens if you have a jumper who's better, who needs to be further out? All right, well then, if their mark is 48 feet out, they're just going to, from this 48-foot mark, they'll just put a mark a foot away. So now they're 13 feet out. And that still works. So that's kind of how we just handle that situation if they need to be wider. So that's, again, something that we're going to do at the start of every meet, is establish that right triangle. Any questions on that?
You do it on both sides, Rob, if you got right and left side jumpers?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually something like we will rehearse. So usually I'll have like an upperclassman kind of lead it, right? But like they know how to do it on their own by, the third or fourth meet. I'm still there to help them with it just in case. But usually I have like, a kid that's in an upper level math class that can handle it and kind of guide kids. Like I said, it's easier to do with 3 people, but then, yeah, if we got to do it on both sides, we do it on both sides. So
I assume with that tape measure, you've got the, 12 to 28 to 48. Are you actually just having somebody put their finger down and you just
so
in the tape measure basically?
Yeah, so we have, the person that will start with it here, kind of holding it even with the standard. And then there'll be a person that'll have it out. So then this person here will put their finger down right there, right? So then what can happen theoretically is the person that was at the standard doesn't have to hold it anymore, because that's just 12 feet. Like this mark is at 12 over here, right? So then this person can go over here if you want, and then put their finger down at 28. And then this person here can come back here, right? And then they can get that to 48.
So, now, if they're off,
but like again, that's the thing that you got to be careful with. Like if it's an easy setup, then it's not like you can do it with 2, but you do want to make sure you're forming the right triangle. So like having a third person, I'd say is definitely helpful, where this person is still holding on to this, because if you don't get to 48 over here, that's going to tell this person that they need to move, right? So they're going to either need to move out or in to form that right triangle. Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I was thinking of squaring up a deck, and I'm like, I didn't realize you did this at high jump. So thanks for explaining. That's a brilliant idea. Then you got a nice straight line.
Yeah. So that's just at least when I first started doing it, what I would do is everyone to have their own unique right triangle. And that was just stupid. Like it took there's not enough time to do that. Right. So if you just establish one right triangle, then you can kind of pull through and get everybody's mark from that right triangle. So it's just in my mind, it's a time saver, but it's you're not sacrificing accuracy on that. So
perfect.
So that worked for us. It's worked pretty well. And so yeah, we practice like forming that right triangle at practice, so they know what to do. All right, so we went through that. Finding the mark a little bit different. So this gets back to kind of like you can use Boost formula, and that's obviously, not a bad idea. All right. But with finding the mark, wait for my screen to catch up with me here. Here we go. All right. So this is like if we're doing full approach for the first day, like how are we going to find our marks? All right. So like I said, what I'm going to do is I'll tend to have at least guys that I have no idea how high they can jump, or some I do, but the vast majority are going to be at like 12 feet, which would be here for that bottom check mark. Okay. But what we'll do, we're indoors for this. I will run a new triangle. All right. So same kind of purpose here, but we'll go 15 out, 8 back, and then a hypotenuse of 17. Okay. So I'm forming a new right triangle. And then from there, the reason why I'm going 15 out is so it's not in their way. So they're going to have, marks that are up here. But I'm actually going to have the tape measure run back here. So after I form that right triangle, I'm going to take the end of the tape down here, and I'm going to run it through this point. So now, again, I know that that's a straight line going through here. And then I'll just have them randomly start. So maybe like I'll say, you look like you're going to start at 44 feet back. Okay. And then I'll watch where they hit. Okay. So, maybe on their first attempt from 44 feet, they hit here if we're doing a 10-step approach. Okay. So then I know, all right, well, now instead of 44, now you're going to go from 40, 46. And then I'll take a look at that. And then maybe on that one went from 46, they hit about here. And that might be where I want them to hit. So that's just kind of how we establish it. And then again, they're going to be at 12 feet right here. So there'll be 12 out. And then the nice thing for us is we're indoors. So there's actually, I don't even need to form that right triangle. There's lines on the court that kind of guarantee that I'm going to have a right angle anyway. So it just works out pretty well for us with what we're able to do. But that's how we establish our mark. It's just, okay, you're going to be 12 out and you're going to be 40, 48 feet back or 46 feet back. And we just base it off of kind of where they're hitting. And we just continue to rehearse and rehearse and rehearse over and over and over again until they're hitting a consistent spot. And, if I didn't have the court there, obviously, then I would be looking at forming a right triangle with that. But that's what I would do. If I didn't have the court lines to help me with that, I would put it 15 feet out. That way they have some space here between the tape, because the tape measure is just going to be there. And then I'm just using that and saying, okay, that didn't look good. Go back to 47. That didn't look good. Go to 46 and a half. All right. So that's kind of how we handle that. Any questions there? All right. Usually, like what you'll find is with returning athletes, I write down like their marks I have all their marks from the previous year, so it's pretty easy to kind of establish those. The new kids, it takes a little bit more work, but even then, you can have a pretty good idea once you get comfortable with it. Like just saying, you're going to probably be this far back, and then usually you're within 2 feet either way, and it doesn't take too long. All right. Another component that we'll address is just a practice curve. So when you're doing short approach jumps, you kind of want the same feeling for the athlete that they would have during a full approach jump, even though they're not going to really have that because they're not going to have the same speed, obviously. But, you want to take into account at least the feeling with the curve that they might have. So this is just totally stolen from Boo. And I tend to have either I set this up or I teach a kid that might have PE in our indoor facility, 7th hour, to set it up, or I will have a manager set it up. So however I can get this thing set up, depending on where we're at with high jump on a particular day. But the practice curve, this is how we go about doing it. So what you'll do if you're dealing with jumpers that jump off their left foot here. All right, what we'll do is we take a tape measure, and from this takeoff point that we hope for, we will look at the intersection of the bar and the standard. So that's where that green line is. So about where that would be, we just kind of eye it up, and it's going to be 28 feet away. And then from there, we will move this. So this is the tape measure right here, 28 feet. This is the start of the tape measure. And then this right here is at 28 feet. And then we will just form, this will be our pivot point over here. And we use this as kind of, we'll just sweep that arc through, okay, to form the practice curve. So again, that's just straight from Bouchek's Nader. And I will put tape or chalk down on the runway for that. And that's what we'll follow for our short approach work. All right. And that's worked really well because it just takes away some of the guesswork. It takes away misreps more than anything. So I found that to be really helpful. And I don't have a problem putting that on the ground. It gives them kind of something to follow. They don't really look at it either. So it works pretty well. So I like to use tape or chalk. I've used cones sometimes, but I like tape or chalk just because it's less of an impediment. So that's how we handle the short approach stuff when we do that in practice. All right, so we'll switch back now. Any questions? Hop back to that one more time, but a couple of things to cover before we do that. All right, so general approach basics. All right, the big thing, 5 steps are going to be required on the curve regardless of how far back you're going. So whether you're doing, I guess you could do a 6-step, but 8, 10, or 12 are probably the most common amount of steps on the curve. For our jumpers, the vast majority of them are going to be at 10 steps, but I have had some at 8. I really haven't had any at 12, to be honest. I really haven't needed that. Okay, I have had one jumper who kind of did a little skip into a start, so I guess he was technically 12, but that's rarely the case. Okay, so just like long and triple, I would encourage jumpers to push to vertical in a third of the number of steps, so that's going to be their drive phase. So if you're looking at a 12-step approach, that's going to be 4. 10-step, we're going to say push to vertical in 3. 8-step, it would just be 2. Okay, so within that, if you got 5, however many you're pushing to vertical in, depending on the number of steps you have, and then you have 5 steps required on the curve, you're going to have some transition steps. So the transition steps numbers are here. So if you're at 12 steps, you're going to have 3 transition steps into the curve. If you're at 10 steps, you'll have 2. 8 steps, you'll have 1. Entering the curve for a 10-step approach, that's going to be what I'll base most things off of. All right, and we'll see this within some video moving forward. But step 4, turning hips slightly at the push-off. All right, so that 4th step will be like if you're dealing with a left-footed jumper, it's going to be their second left. All right, they're going to just turn their hips a little bit. So you'll see that it's a video that I actually showed before, but we'll get the visual of it here. Then the 5th step is obviously going to initiate the curve. That's the first step that you're going to be on the curve, and be slightly outside the line of travel. You'll see that establish the lean. So you'll see that kind of cast out. So that'll be a right step for the left-footed jumper, kind of casting out. And then step 6 is actually the first. I should have said it is the first step on the curve because you got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 5. All right. So you'll be in the curve in step 6. You'll be back in that kind of line of travel of the curve. and there'll be an inward turn there. So one thing that I'm just always aware of is just the jumper that's kind of running the post route. So having that straight line and then that jagged sharp turn, we want to obviously avoid that. That's if that happens at the start, you really can't. There's really hard to make up for that. You can't develop the forces necessary to rotate over the bar properly. Okay. So a couple things with just general curve mechanics. All right. In terms of just the mathematical part, really quick before we get rolling. All right. One common thing that you'll hear is just being kind of tangent to the curve. Okay. So that's like going to be in line or intersecting the curve at one point. So like the foot should kind of be in line with the curve where it's, if there was an imaginary curve drawn, the foot is going to be tangent to that curve. All right. The hips and the shoulders, on the other hand, should be perpendicular, or mathematically we would call that normal, okay, to that tangent line. So it's going to form that right angle. All right. So that's something we can look at. And one thing I've toyed with, because I'm a nerd, is my father-in-law has a drone. So we've looked at some, some footage of high jumpers from kind of an aerial view. And that's kind of a key component there that you can see with that kind of viewpoint. But anyway, we'll see an inward lean, outward foot pressure. So as we look at this approach right here, okay, I shared this one before, but here's the jumper's fourth step. So he's kind of turning there. There's the fifth step that travels outside, and you can see now he's kind of back on that within that line of travel. Within the sixth, and he's in his approach from that point forward. So when I talk about outward foot pressure, okay, right there, he should be feeling it on the outside part of that right foot. And then here with the left foot, he should be feeling it on the inner part of the left foot. So that's the outward foot pressure we should feel. The inward lean's obviously present. This right arm, that's the one we're talking about, kind of driving it down and away. All right, so when we're doing things like serpentine runs and curve runs, that's going to be a big focus. The shoulder's normal, so again, kind of perpendicular to that tangent line. The foot tangent to the curve, you can see in this case, he's kind of a little bit rotated, a little bit too far in maybe. All right, and then the steps on the curve. Ideally, I would like him to be on this yellow line within this rep, but he's not. But at least he's maintaining the distance away from the curve throughout the entire rep. Okay. So that's what we're looking for there within the curve mechanics. And that's really the most important part, like how they enter the curve to establish the proper forces to be able to rotate over the bar. A lot of times we want to try to fix what's happening over the bar by giving them cues there, but the vast majority of the time it's going to be how they enter the curve and the forces that they're producing because of that. All right, any questions there? All right, I think I got one more time where I hop back to my surface here. Okay. So in regards to just general curve mechanics, all right, one thing that you can look for, and you can kind of do this, I suppose, after the fact, but sometimes like you'll hear jump coach say like you're going, you're too deep, you're too shallow. All right, and that's really just referring to the angle that they're making. So ideally, when the jumper comes in, the angle that should be formed, that's going to be a little bit off, but the angle that should be formed here, which you can kind of just extend through and then out here, that works too. But that should be 30 degrees. Okay, that's what we're gonna look for. So we're looking for a 30-degree angle. That's usually really easy to tell if they're hitting a good angle, because if they have that at the takeoff point, the foot will be pointed. Okay, the foot at takeoff will be pointed towards the midpoint of the pit here. All right, that's what I'm usually looking for, to see if the foot is pointed here. A lot of times what you'll see is the foot is pointed more towards this standard. Now, I will say I have heard, really excellent jump coaches say that that's where it should be. From my experience within the event, and just based off of how it looks, like if the foot is pointed this way, that's just putting a ton of torque on that knee. I just don't like it. And I think it's hard to jump from that position, to be honest. So I'm looking at it from the midpoint of the far side of the pit. I've also heard coaches say that the back corner. So I just kind of go with the midpoint there, and I've heard great coaches say that that's what they do too. So that's what I roll with. But if that toe is pointed there, that kind of dictates their line of travel a little bit. So you'll see like they're able to clear the bar effectively there. They're not over the bar an excessive amount of time. They're not landing in the pit over here, like with, in the middle of the pit. They're kind of getting in this area when they land, if they're going again from that left side. Okay. If that, we'll tend to follow, like if a jumper is pointed more towards this standard, they're going to be riding along the bar a little bit longer over clearance, and they might land over here. Okay, so that would be a scenario where the approach could be, and I wouldn't say always, but it could be a little bit too deep. Okay, so they're coming in here more like that. All right. A scenario that can happen, all right, the opposite of that would be that they're too shallow and they're kind of entering here and maybe landing here. Okay, so again, that 30-degree angle is something you can do sort of after the fact, if needed, but usually you can just tell by how long are they over the bar is going to answer that question, right? So you can kind of utilize flight to help answer that. Now, there could be other cases where their angle is good, but then their foot position is off. All right, so they might have that 30-degree angle, but what may have happened, like at the start of their curve, so when they begin their curve, their foot angle, they may have rotated a little bit too much. And once they rotated a little bit too much, it's going to continue to rotate. And it's going to continue to get more and more flat as time goes on. So then, their entry angle might be good, but again, then their foot angle might be a little bit off, and that's not, in my opinion, a great position to jump from. Okay, so we'll talk, I think, a little bit about that some more. Okay. In terms of the viewpoint, like where I like to stand when I'm watching high jump, honestly, it kind of just depends on the setup at the meet and where I can get the best video. But if I had a choice, I would say that right here would probably be my favorite. But as time has gone on, I've started to like right here a little bit more. In both of those, what they allow me to do is see if the jumper is maintaining their lean in all the way through their plant step. Those are the two spots that I think are the best. So as I said, I think this I've started to like a little bit more, but I think both allow you to see that, and we'll talk a lot about that moving forward. Okay, I already talked about the angle and the toe position, so we're good there. And then, another big thing that I just want to readdress that we talked about before is having a true lean. So when I talk about having a true lean, what we're looking at is up here. The true lean would be this one. So we want to make sure when we're looking at the lean of the jumper that it's from head to toe, all right, straight line with the body. It's not the fake things that you got going on in those other two to the right. Okay. right. So now we'll jump back and we'll get into the rest of this thing. Any questions so far? All right, visual focus. Again, I think probably stolen from Boom. All right, but this is something that we rehearse a ton. All right, so step 1 through 3, we're going to have, so this again, based off 10-step approach, I'm going to focus on, have the jumper focus on their bottom check mark. All right, so I name that the base. All right. Steps 4 through 6, they're going to focus on the near standard. All right. And that kind of deters cutting the curve or running that post route that we talked about. And then steps 7 through 10, they're going to focus on the far standard. All right. So literally we rehearse this a ton, and I will give them a verbal cue over and over and over again. So on their, their first step, I'm going to say base. And then on their 4th step, I'm going to say near. And then on their 7th step, I'm going to say far, because they need that verbal cue to kind of get that to be comfortable. All right. They're not going to just, you can't just say, oh, on your 1st step, do this, on your 4th step, do this, on your 7th step. It just doesn't work. Okay. So giving them that verbal cue is huge. I used to do like 1, 4, and 7, but then that didn't work well, because I also encourage jumpers to count their steps. Like in their head, they should kind of have that rhythm, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So that just messed up with their head. And then we went to a letter, and they didn't like the letter. They actually just liked the word. So I just picked out 3 simple words with 1 syllable: base, near, far, and that worked best. So feel free to come up with whatever else you want. If you come up with something better than I do, awesome. Like, please share it. But that's what we do. So that's their visual focus. Okay. And again, that's something that hopefully we hammer that in the beginning of the season, so then it just becomes kind of second nature as the season goes on. And we come back to it often too. Like it's not just something that dies. Right? It's something that needs to be consistently implemented. So, maybe in the beginning of the season, we're doing that like 3 times a week, but probably through the rest of the season, we're doing it 2 or 1 times a week, depending on how often we can do approach rehearsal. Takeoff location in general, rarely are jumpers going to take off too far away, because the brain's going to protect. So, you're not going to take off from a spot that's too far away. You'll see it periodically, but for the most part, it just doesn't happen, because the jumper's going to, if they feel like they're too far away on that leg that they're supposed to take off, they'll take another step or 2 to get closer. All right. If your jumper is jumping too close, that's probably just a comfort issue. All right. And they just, probably need a little bit more rehearsal with them, even within short approach, just to get more comfortable with the event. All right. Better jumpers, so jumpers that jump higher, are going to take off further away from the center of the crossbar. So your best jumpers, like if you watch elites, they're going to take off like near where the standard is. That's how far out they're going to take, right? Because it just takes them longer to go up to get their center of mass to go to a higher height. Okay. Most of, maybe like your good high school jumpers will be a foot or 2 in from the standard. And then your beginners will be 2 to 3 feet in from the standard. So, I get that kind of like the common question. Well, what about like when you're setting up that practice curve? Like, what are you doing? I'm probably picking up something. Yeah, I'm probably going with 2 feet inside the standard. That's where we'll set that up at. Okay. My better jumpers might be a little bit further out. They're not hitting that exact takeoff mark. My worst jumpers might hit a little bit further in. That's fine. It's not a big deal. Okay, in flight. All right, so we got some pretty good guys here to watch here, but knees should be flexed and separated, so you can kind of see that within this image right here already. You'll watch, as we watch these, but like here, this arm's already at the side. This one will be brought to the side. All right, so that's just the purpose of that. To having the knees bent and bringing the arms back down is you're shortening the axis of rotation, so you're going to be able to rotate faster. Right? That's just physics. Okay. So that's why this arm is going to come back, so you're able to rotate faster. Okay. Another common thing that I think, like back when I was learning how to high jump, it was like arch your back, arch your back, arch your back. Well, it's not so much like you're arching your back per se, like your spine. It's like you're arching your whole back side, right? Your whole posterior is kind of what's arching. Okay. So instead of just focusing on arching the back, which can actually cause the butt to go down, I just try to encourage athletes to press the hips. So if they press their hips up, then you're going to get a nice arch. It's something that I really don't try to focus in on too much, just because, again, like I think saying like things like arch your back could really just lead to bad stuff. So like if it's an issue, I might bring it up, but if not, then I don't really say anything. Committing to flight. That's a big thing, and that's just a comfort thing, to be honest. So that's really just like being comfortable with your head going down, and you'll see that when we watch this video here, where these guys really throw their head back, and they're okay with that head leading themselves down into the mat, and that's something that takes a long time for athletes to get really comfortable, right? You want to have a scenario where when the knees go over the bar, the head is a lot below it. And that's something, I'll try to stop here, but that's not a comfortable spot for your brain to be in. Okay. So getting them to commit to that is huge. And probably, one thing I went away from for a long time was just your simple like back pop over. So like off of a box, just jumping straight back over the bar. I didn't do those because I was like, well, you're jumping off 2 feet. It's stupid. Like you don't jump off 2 feet, but just having that comfort level, like that feeling of safety is really important. And, so we've done that a lot more over the past couple of years. So as we look at this video here, we can just kind of see some of these key things. So we'll see the lean that we've been talking about. I'll talk about the head and shoulders being close to the bar on the way up, but there you can see when the knees cross the bar, the shoulders were well below. That's huge. Okay, so this is not normal. Like if you get a high school jumper to look like this, like you're probably in pretty good business. That tells you that you have really good curve mechanics and you're rotating properly. Like that's really what you need. So in flight, that's one key thing that I'm going to look for. Okay. So there you can see like the neck is extended back, and then to get the legs to come over, you have to have the proper timing and in terms of when you're going to flex the neck to get the feet to clear. So you can see once that neck gets flexed, once they bring the neck in, that's when the legs will kind of flop over. Okay, so that timing is huge. All right. So it's just commonalities amongst all these, right? They're all incredible at just really, being able to drive the shoulders down towards the pit. And that's just ridiculous. So it's just cool to see. And then once that neck comes up, they're able to then clear the feet. So they do a great job of just shortening the lever, and then once they make that clearance, they get the feet. Bring the feet over. So one common cue, I think, again, stolen from Boo, is just clear the bar on the way down, which, you watch a high school meet, maybe a quarter of the jumpers are actually clearing the bar on the way down, which just tells you that they just have a lot more in the tank. That's a fun one to watch. It's my second favorite YouTube video. My first is the triple jump one that I'll share later. So we'll go through just a session here with high jump on what to watch for. So items 1A and 1B. Approach rhythm, it's the same as long and triple. Okay, so we want to make sure that it's a gradual crescendo building up, and we want to get to a takeoff velocity that's the maximum that they're able to handle. Right. So just like any other jump, same thing. All right, it's important to make sure we emphasize that. And then curve initiation. All right, so looking at that video that we talked about before, are they rotating the hips a little bit on step, on the push off of step 4? Are they traveling outside the curve line on step 5? And then are they establishing that curve on step 6? Okay, so those are the first two things. Like, make sure that those are good to go. All right, then from there, all right, the most common error that I'll see is that the jumper will abandon their lean. So that's going to be super common for any novice high jumper. So there's 4 main reasons why I think that happens. One is that they're just moving too fast. So they just can't control that. That they can't maintain that lean and still jumping and then get into the pit. So if that's the case, what I'll encourage the jumper to do is just move forward and emphasize a more controlled approach. I don't like saying a slower approach just because I just don't like the context of that. Like, move slower, it just doesn't mesh well with me. So I just say be more controlled in your approach. And usually that will help them maintain their lean away from the bar. Okay. Fear of not landing in the pit. Again, that is something that can be conquered by just doing a lot of short approach jumps. Possibly even off a ramp, just so they get more comfortable being in the air a little bit longer. All right, and just a steady diet of that, I think, can help quite a bit. They may not be comfortable in flight. Okay, so steady diet of what I was saying, the pop over. So just maybe off a box and off 2 legs, just going up and over. All right, so we have like a 2 foot box, a 3 foot box. Like those work pretty well. But whatever you got, I mean, even if it's off the ground, just to get them comfortable in that position where they're kind of flying blind a little bit. And again, we just focus on committing to that jump, trying to get comfortable with throwing that head back, and then at the proper time, then flexing the neck forward. Okay. And then the fourth one that, again, we can't ignore ever for abandoning the lean is like they just don't initiate the curve properly. So if they don't initiate the curve properly, kind of everything else just goes to hell. Okay, so it's impossible to play catch up. Now, with the abandoning the lean, the other thing that I'll just say here is if we're watching it from kind of the far side, so on the other side of the pit from where the jumper is taking off, heading into the plant step, this diagram kind of sums it up. This is what we should see over here. So as their plant step, their jump step comes down, you should see them have this lean away from the bar, which would be kind of over here. So they should be leaning away from the bar. And then as they go to jump, so as they take off, when they toe off, they should be vertical. All right, so this is something that we look at all the time. And what is true for a lot of high school jumpers is as they go into their final steps, so this is their plant, they're vertical. And then when they go to jump, so at toe off, they're leaning into where the bar is. All right. And obviously, if you're leaning into the bar, it's impossible to get your center of mass up as high as possible to clear as high as possible. So this diagram for me probably is like 80% of what I deal with as a high jump coach. So we're consistently trying to get to look like this, leaning away from the bar into plant. And then at takeoff, we're trying to be vertical. And if you can get that, like that's a big part of the battle for sure. So the third thing, the jump foot parallel to the bar, I mentioned this before. So we don't want, like if I'm a left-footed jumper, I don't want that left foot when I come to the plant to jump to be pointed at that far standard. I want it to be at the midpoint of the pit. So what are the reasons for that? Well, one, it could be possibly that you're too deep into the approach, which we outlined. So in that case, you could move back. All right. The other thing is you can decrease the angle of curve initiation. So in step 6, like when you are on the first step of your curve, maybe your foot angle. So like if 12 and 6 represent your line coming down the approach, that straight line coming down the approach, which is going towards your bottom check mark. Maybe at step 6, the angle that you have is at like 4 o'clock, okay, with your foot. So from there, it's just going to continue to get flatter and flatter. All right. So what you would encourage the jumper to do is have less of an angle. So that's what I'm calling the curve initiation. So maybe instead of being at 4 o'clock, they're at 5 o'clock. And then that will put them in a better position to not be as flat with that jump foot being parallel to the bar. So maybe now that jump foot is now pointed towards the midpoint of the opposite side of the pit. Okay, so we're looking for that 30-degree angle as mentioned before, okay, at the midpoint of the opposite or far side of the pit. So that's the third one. And finally, last one for high jump, positions in flight. So I mentioned these a little bit earlier, but the head and neck should come close to the bar early in flight. Low shoulders on the way over when the knees are over the bar. That indicates good rotation, and then we're going to clear the bar on the way down. So just watching a couple of these to ensure we're good with that. So there's the head and shoulders close on the way up. Shoulders are low when the knees are over the bar, and obviously clearing the bar on the way down. So those are the big 4 for me. Those are the items that I'm watching consistently. And honestly, like some of them, kind of go hand in hand. Like if you don't have a good lean, it's going to be pretty hard to get to good positions in flight, right? So a lot of it just comes back to what happened before you left the ground. And it's the same thing with long and triple. Okay. So, none of that stuff, really changes. Most of it's going to be determined by the path that you're following prior to taking off. All right. Any questions in regard to the high jump stuff?
That's good stuff, Rob.
Thank you. All right. So triple jump, it's my favorite event. I guess I should say it's like my favorite event, and then it's also like the least favorite when you watch some people that struggle with it. It can be kind of painful, but when you watch really quality athletes do it, it's just it's poetry in my mind. There's nothing that's more athletic, and the name of the game in triple jump for me, it's just the preservation of posture. We talk about it in all the track and field, but like with triple jump, if we compare that to like long jump, I talked about like the possibility of like over rotating or being leaning back and then not being able to land and come through the jump properly. Okay, that's just off one jump, right? In triple jump, we have 3 different times where our posture is going to kind of dictate what's going to happen in the air. So if it's bad from the start, it's going to continue to be bad or get worse as time goes on because you're leaving the ground for a prolonged period of time. So you don't have that ability to really like catch yourself like you do with sprinting. Okay. So running mechanics are huge. If you have an athlete who has an anterior pelvic tilt and is running with, their chest forward, they're going to struggle. Like, how are they going to triple jump? They're just going to, potentially fall on their face, right? They're not going to really ever be able to do the event to their capabilities unless you correct those running mechanics. And that's honestly something that I overlooked when I first started coaching the event. I had a kid that could high jump like 5'10" off of both his left and right leg. He was a 40, think 44, 45-foot triple jumper, but his running mechanics were terrible. Now, granted, he was a basketball guy, so I didn't really get him until, the middle of March. So it was a challenge, but, that I was trying to fix some things within his jump, but really the time invested should have been focused in on cleaning up his running mechanics, and those things probably would have went away. Okay. And the other thing about triple jump, I often say it's a grown person's event. Like I've been guilty of just saying, especially when I was coaching girls, it was like, I know at the frost off level, there's going to be, within our conference, we might have at that time, I think we had 6 schools. So at the frost off level, I knew there was going to be like 5 triple jumpers at our conference meet. So it was like, oh, do you want to try triple jump this week? And, the week of conference, right? Because we, may have had a couple, but we needed them in other areas or something like that. And you just kind of throw somebody in there and they develop bad habits, but they score points for you. I've gotten away from that now. I kind of train every jumper to be a triple jumper, with the understanding that maybe, 33% of them might actually end up competing in the event. So don't rush it, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, focus on some of the things that we've talked about throughout the course of this series. And, eventually they'll be able to produce the power necessary, the force necessary to perform the triple jump. Identification is a huge thing. So I kind of go by this, take the best athletes they have and make them triple jumpers and hurdlers. Just because you look at I think I did it last year, where it was like, how many people competed in the 100 in our state, right? At our level. So we have 3A, how many were there? So there might've been like 3,000. And then you look at the number of athletes that competed in the triple jump, and it might've been like 700, right? So it's like, you're automatically competing against less people, right? So take your best athletes and put them in those events. It's the same thing with hurdles. So that's just my general philosophy. Like you're cutting down who you're competing against. So in general, I'm going to find the best athletes, and I'm going to, lobby for them to be jumpers on my standpoint. And, I'll fight over with the hurdle coach, because he kind of has the same philosophy. All right. So as I stated earlier, you want to trade everybody as if they were going to be triple jumpers, just because I think it's the most dynamic of the 3. And, you're not doing a disservice to the other 2 if you train them to be a triple jumper. So maybe they will or will not become one. All right. But doing the items that are necessary for triple jump will be helpful in long and high. Okay. Target tests, that's another common question. So what am I looking at the start of the season to maybe target some athletes that could possibly be triple jumpers or jumpers in general? I look at a fly 10. That's a pretty standard one. And then I do a qualitative assessment of bounding. So we used to do, where we measured some things in regards to bounding. Now I just really watch them bound. And then it's like, oh, I like what I see there. So like, we'll have groups, and I'll watch a group, and I'll kind of give them some basics about bounding, and then I see what they can do. So you can measure it for sure. And we measure it as time goes along. But at the start of the season, it's just like, okay, let me see what you can do after we introduce some basics about bounding. And that tells me something about their coordination. So are they able to get like the proper foot contacts after my explanation? And then are they bouncing, right? Are they able to bound well? So I get kind of a 2-for-1 there. And then the backboard test is really simple. This is like, okay, here's a backboard, here's a rim, basketball hoop, like, all right, jump off your right foot and let's see how high you can get. Now jump off your left. And, the ones that are able to jump pretty high off both, that's a good indicator that you got somebody who can do a good job triple jumping. All right. It'll also be interesting because there are some athletes who prefer to jump off 2 feet, right? So like for me, I always prefer to jump off 1 foot. So you'll see some you'll tell them, hey, jump as high as you can, try to jump off your left, and then they still jump off 2 feet. So if they do that, it doesn't mean that they can't be good in the jumps. It just means that that's just where their comfort is. And, it could tell you something maybe about whether they're like more elastic or more muscle driven. But, you can still get something out of them. For me, I think I could have been an okay 2-foot jumper if I put more time into it. I just never did because I didn't really have to for anything that I did. But I do think you can still have an athlete who prefers to jump off to be a good jumper in, long, triple, or high. Okay. As far as the approach for triple is concerned, typically 1 or 2 steps shorter than long jump, and that's just because the forces that are going to be encountered in triple are going to be pretty extreme, and they're just not going to be able to handle that horizontal velocity. Okay, so that's in that 1 to 2 steps. To be perfectly honest, is like maybe by the end of the year. I had a jumper that was an 18-step long jump kid, and was able to handle that force fine and did pretty well. But like we struggled to get him to be able to handle the forces necessary for triple when he was at a 12-step approach. So that's going to be kind of an individual basis, right? But we're tending to look at like 12 to 16 steps. 16 would be at the very high end. I've only had a couple that went through that or did 16. The kid that I had that was close to 50 feet, he was 14. So just to kind of give you a ballpark there. It's really all about what they can handle force-wise and where they're at velocity-wise. Okay. With long and high, I always say that we're going to be at an even number for the approach step. So the stronger leg, the jumping leg, is going to be the one that is forward. For triple, there's some flexibility there. So it can be an odd or even number on the approach. So it could be 12 steps, it could be 13 steps. Regardless, the strong leg is going to be forward. So if you have that hybrid with triple high or triple long, they're still going to start with the same foot forward, just so those mechanics are consistent. I don't want them to have to focus on a different leg being forward. All right. Perks for the even number of steps. If you have an even number of steps, you're going to have 2 jumps off the strong leg. So some jumpers may prefer that. With the odd, okay, so we tend to have either like a strong leg or a coordinated leg. So for me, I'm right-handed. I prefer to jump off my left leg. That's kind of like my strong leg. But if I was going to kick a soccer ball, I would kick a soccer ball with my right leg. That's my more coordinated leg. Okay, so some jumpers like to have that coordinated leg first because your first 2 phases are going to be faster. So it's a more coordinated action there. All right, that's where, for me, I think most of our jumpers are falling into. That's what they prefer. It also then, when you go into your landing, you're jumping off the same leg that you may long jump off of, right? So heading into your 3rd phase, if I long jump off my left, but then I triple jump going right, left, it's consistent then going into the pit. Not that the mechanics are going to be the same in that final phase in the landing. Always you might, like we tend to have like a hitch or a hang in long jump, kind of like a hybrid there. Whereas within triple, it's just more like, you kind of get up, you throw your hands up, you bring both knees up, and then you land. So it's a little bit different. But that's what I've seen more of our jumpers gravitate towards, is going off the more coordinated leg. But that's something that we kind of have to play with over the course of time and see where they're going to be best. I will say, like, I've done the more coordinated leg, like the jumper felt comfortable, but then we've switched, and then they went with the stronger leg for 2, and then the coordinated leg for 1, and then all of a sudden they're jumping 2 feet further. So it's really something that kind of has to be played with. And that happens at the highest level. Christian Taylor, who I think is the best athlete that nobody knows about on the planet, right? In Rio, he jumped one way. I can't remember if it was right, left, or left, right. And then in London, in London, he did it one way. And then Rio, he switched and he won gold medal both ways. So, switching legs. So it's pretty wild. So it's just something you gotta have to play with. Styles. So this video, which for some reason says it's unavailable, but this is just a slow motion triple jump. I'll get that corrected, but I'll share that out. But just so you can see the different arm styles that exist with triple. Most of my guys prefer to go double the entire way through. Okay. So that's what you'll see within this video. For whatever reason why it's let's see if I just click that, what happens. All right, but when double all the way through is just your standard double arm action all the way through. You'll see within that video, and again I'll share that link in our debrief, I suppose, but you'll see some single arm style. You'll see kind of like a double single hybrid. All right. What I've noticed is for the majority, like I wouldn't say the majority, but it seems with females to be more common to be single arm. With males now, at least at the elite level, it seems more common to be double arm, but it's kind of based off comfort. I honestly don't steer them one direction. I kind of see what they're giving me at the start, and then we kind of roll with that. And then if we need to make changes, we make changes. So that video that's unavailable is my favorite video on YouTube. And again, I'll share that with you. So common technical flaws. All right. The first one is that they prepare like they're going to do a long jump. So with long jump, we have to give up a little bit of speed at the end of the approach to kind of dip down with the penultimate so we can project ourselves up into the air. We do not want to do that with triple jump, right, for the most part. Okay. So we don't need excessive penultimate mechanics where we're, focusing on getting the hips to lower. All right. So heading, with the penultimate, and this is something I alluded to in the Jump Drills for All Athletes video, I'll toggle between reps with the run, jump. Like, okay, this is like your triple jump approach. This is like your long jump. This is like your high jump. So we'll toggle back and forth, and we'll alternate arm styles. So it's just something that they can kind of get comfortable with in case they're doing more than one jump. All right, but we want to try to avoid that long jump preparation. So instead of saying like, with the penultimate step, which I kind of have here, instead of saying like a rolling or rocking chair kind of contact, I'll say normal or flat, depending on where the athlete is. And then from there, this is the jump leg. So the jump leg will be more of a rolling kind of rocking chair contact. But again, depending on the athlete, I might actually use the cue flat. It just kind of depends on the degree in which they're casting that foot out. So if I have a jumper who's really casting that jump foot out a lot and getting like a huge kind of heel jam where they're jamming the heel on the ground and losing velocity, I'll tell them to make that a little bit flatter so they don't lose that velocity. So it just kind of depends on the athlete, but those are probably the most common like penultimate takeoff cues that I'll use. But regardless, once the athlete is at full support, as we talked about before, we want the shin perpendicular to the ground. So that's that jump leg. We want that to be perpendicular at full support. Any questions before I go on to the second one? Okay, second issue that I see is just a lack of hip displacement. So hip displacement would be when you're at toe off, like how far in front of your hips, or how far your hips are in front of that foot at toe off. All right. We want to try to get that to be pretty large. How much I'd say could be, a foot, 18 inches, somewhere in that range. But usually the easy way to tell if they're getting enough hip displacement is the height that they take on the first phase. If the first phase is really high, that tells you that they're not getting enough hip displacement. So that's the easy way to kind of view that. All right. If the first phase is like really up there, then that's a problem for a lot of reasons, or tends to be a problem for most jumpers. So that means that they're just not getting a good extension off of the board. All right. And we really need that. So what happens with that if they don't, so if they have bad hip displacement, they'll tend to have an arch kind of first phase, right? So that vertical acceleration coming down coupled with the horizontal is going to be too much force for them to handle. Okay. So you know that the horizontal velocity is going to be greatest at the start of the approach, or I'm sorry, at the start of the first phase there. So that coupled with gravity still pulling them down to earth is just going to be too much for them to handle, and that's going to be one big thing that will not lead to a quality first phase. All right. The other reason why we want hip displacement is to put the hip flexors on stretch. So, we get a nice stretch within this area here, which is going to allow, it's kind of just going to be an elastic effect where this leg will now be able to come through. All right. And get up to, maybe a position that this leg is in. Okay. So we're just going to take advantage of free elastic energy. So how do you get there? I often say, like with this foot, and these are the same cues that I would use when I was coaching hurdles. Leave the foot on the ground behind you, push to the big toe, push back. And then another thing, if those aren't working where you're focusing on the foot, I will say like your first phase is in a tunnel, right? So you don't want to hit your head on the top of the tunnel, on top of the tunnel. Okay, first phase in the tunnel. All right. So those are the common ones. With this third one, the push back. So that's what I'll cue the first phase, and then the contact on the second and the third, I'll say push down, because we want the athlete to tend to rise up on those. That's kind of what they're going to be fighting. So it's like push back, push down, push down. So this kid was good. We'll see it here. But if we just watch within this drill, so these boxes are about 18 inches high. Just watch the torso flexion as we go through here. Watch it one more time. I'll pause. So one thing that I'm not a fan of is the cue coming off of the first phase. So if we're watching this, you're going to see him hit on the right, okay? And then he's going to come up onto the box on his right, okay? And one thing we don't want coming off of the first phase, or that I don't like to say, is to take that takeoff leg and kind of like bring it up hard, okay? Like try to kind of force that into flexion. Because what happens is the posture gets compromised. Okay, so you can kind of see how he rotates forward. So if we watch it in fast motion here, you're going to kind of see when he comes up to this box right here, how he kind of lurches forward a little bit. And we don't want that. Okay, so you kind of see it there too. So we'll watch it one more time. Kind of see he just lunges a little bit forward with that upper body. All right, and that's a product of him trying to bring that leg up aggressively. So like when you try to bring that leg up aggressively, what happens is you naturally just kind of bring the upper body forward. Okay, because that makes you feel like you're bringing that leg up a little bit more. All right, so that's something we want to kind of try to avoid. So if I go back to this, what I'm saying is we take off of this leg, all right, and then I want to get this displacement with the hips, so this is kind of just elastic coming through. I don't want to have the jumper focus on bringing this up aggressively, because if they bring this up aggressively, what tends to happen is the torso will go forward, because that's going to give them the illusion that they're when you bring your torso forward, it gives you that feeling that you're bringing your leg up higher, because that's just where you're at in space. All right. So we want the posture to remain vertical. All right. So that's something that I'm not a huge fan of. Like when people say, like, bring that takeoff leg up aggressively. The counter of that tends to be the upper body coming forward. And what are we trying to preserve? We're trying to preserve posture. So we don't want that. Okay. So here, a little bit different drill, just bounding over the boxes. Okay. You can see that he's not going to kind of lurch forward with the upper body as he does this. Okay. Most people would, because they're not as gifted as this athlete. All right. But one thing that I would say is somewhat of a problem with this drill is, that torso isn't flexing forward, but the low back isn't flat. All right. Now this could be a product of, or this is, I think, a product of not having much of a run through where he's able to get to an upright posture. So he's still kind of accelerating forward. So he has to drive forward a little bit. But when we watch him come through here, like when you're actually watching a triple jump, this is the purpose of showing this. All right, you can kind of see how that low back is arched. Sorry. Okay. So you can kind of see, that even before that a little bit, how that low back was a little bit arched. So that's an indicator that we don't have the posture that we've been looking for in triple jump. Within this drill, I think it's okay just because of the way it was set up. But when we're actually watching an athlete triple jump, it's something we would want to try to avoid. Okay, so this is a little bit of a better example where the athlete is upright and has a flat low back. All right, obviously nothing in his way either, or nothing impeding him moving forward. So this is the kind of posture that we would like to see coming through with triple jump, where he's preserving it. There's no arch. So that's, I think, about as good as you're going to get from a high school athlete. Okay, the third thing, all right, again, it's all going to be traced back, like first and foremost, like running mechanics, then that hip displacement. And then from there, within the flight of the first phase, I look to see where the knees meet. Okay, so ideally, we want the knees to meet underneath the center of mass. All right, so this is what we're looking for. So left knee and right knee would be directly underneath the center of mass. So this is what we want. So hip displacement, this leg comes through, this leg drops down. Okay, so it extends, and then the knees meet underneath the center of mass. That's what we're looking for. The most common thing you're going to see high school athletes is that the knees meet in front. Well, if the knees meet in front, to kind of counterbalance that, the torso is going to come forward. So this is the position that you're going to see 90+% of high school triple jumpers be in, where the knees meet in front of the center of mass. We don't want that. Okay, we got preservation of posture. Okay, so what should happen ideally is that a step is going to occur in the air. So this leg right here would extend and come down, and it's like it's taking a step in the air. So it's not going to contact the ground, but it's extending as if it were going to. Okay, so you're just taking, all the first phases is taking a step in the air. And ideally, knees meet under the center of mass. Okay, fourth one, a toe first phase landing. So coming off of that first phase. So if we go back here, this leg comes through, and then it's going to contact the ground again. All right, over here, having a toe first landing. So this athlete was a 23.5, 23.6 long jumper, mid 40s a couple times for triple. And you'll see he does some things extremely well with triple. We'll see that in a second. But one thing that was really a struggle was getting him comfortable, and I don't think we really ever did get him comfortable with contacting the ground off that, the landing into the second phase, heel toe. So you can see here, he actually, he's going to hit that front part of the first foot first. And if you don't believe me, you'll see in the video corresponding here where like his heel literally doesn't hit the ground. And that's not good. Okay, so that just destroys momentum. It's going to be hard to push off of that. And it often will occur if the first phase is too high. For this athlete, that wasn't the case. So you'll see that. So again, there's 3 jumps. It's 3 times more complicated. There's so many different more directions it can go. All right. So you'll see he does a fantastic job. Like this was not even coached. He just did this where he extended the free leg pretty well. And you can see his knees are pretty close to meeting underneath the center of mass, and his posture is fantastic. Like I'd take that every single time. But then you watch the second phase and you're like, man, let me see. Like it's just like he's running, So the reason for that is he's just flat out not, like his heel barely hits the ground here, and you can see that he leads with the toe, and that's the big issue with this. And he can't get any push off that. He's not spending enough time on the ground there, and he just can't generate anything coming off of that. Okay, so that was the battle with him, and unfortunately, we just couldn't get it right for him. And then at some point we just kind of focused in on long term, because that's, he was a gamer, and you could just be like, oh, some kid just jumped 23, so I'm going to jump 23 plus and win. That was his deal, and that was cool, so we rolled with that. I mentioned this drill before, but this is one that I like to toggle with short approach work. So we'll just look at some drills that we do, and I try to keep it super simple with triple jump. So this one deals with those 3 of those big characteristics. So hip displacement, extending the swing leg to get the knees to meet under the center of mass, and then the heel toe contact or rolling contact off the takeoff. So I really like using that drill as much as possible. So that's something like they do some short approach work, and then they'll go through and they'll do 3 reps of that while they're waiting for their next turn. Just first phase. So this is just a beginner rocking through the first phase. And you'll see with this, I have a mat set up here, so you can see he's kind of all over the place, but they're just doing the first phase into the pit. And what I tell them to do is try to bring their swing leg down onto the mat. All right. They won't ever do that. They won't ever hit it. That's only happened one time. This kid in the gold shirt actually did it once. But this is what it'll look like for a beginner. So what we're focusing on, hip displacement, and then extending the free leg. So hip displacement, you can see he doesn't have great hip displacement, but he does a pretty good job of extending the swing leg to target to try to hit this mat, right? So that's not bad for a beginner. Okay. This is what it would look like a little bit better, some better hip displacement with an experienced athlete. Okay. He actually really didn't try too much on that rep, but that's okay. Okay. But you can really see, the better posture and rhythm through that one. Okay. Sometimes from there, then, so that's just first phase. And I would tend to do just the first phase. Like we'll do that after maybe a maximal type day. So on a Monday, when I shared, the whole programming component of things, we looked at, maybe like a high intensity day where we sprint and maybe we bounded on Monday. Coming off of that, just based on when we have access to the pits, might be a Tuesday. So then what would I do on a Tuesday? Well, with triple jumpers, I would just have them work the first phase into the pit, because that's not a huge demand there, at least from a plyometric sense and force sense. So we would just work first phase that day. Coming off of that, it's kind of submaximal. All right, then from there, we can roll through Okay, so this is another one where he probably went a little bit high. I have a hurdle there. Okay, so you can kind of see that. But then after we go through just the first phase, then we'll hit some where we go phase 1, phase 2. So I understand that I'm like within that drill to get them to cycle fully, right? To extend that free leg. I understand that I'm sacrificing the fact that they might have to go a little bit higher on a short approach, right? So I understand that, and it just might be a sacrifice depending on where they're at. Ideally, what would happen, and I'm still working through this, but like if we had like an elevated runway here, then they could project themselves a little bit more forward and have enough time to go through like a kind of a complete cycle that he's going through there without projecting themselves so far in the air. All right. So here's a case where we're doing the first 2 phases. So this is phase 1, phase 2 into the pit. You can see here, not as good of a job extending that swing leg down. So the knees are meeting a little bit in front of the center of mass there, and the torso is a little bit rotated forward, right? So that's something we want to try to avoid, because that's just going to compound itself. So as the torso tends to rotate forward, it's going to be harder and harder for him to get into a good position when he has to land. If that upper body is forward, it's going to be really hard to bring the legs up higher. Okay, so you can see that position there is not exactly what we're looking for. And that was the big battle for him, from his junior to senior year. So that, that was a big difference for him going from like a 45, 46 foot jumper to a 49 foot jumper. That was what we were battling. That, and also just getting more consistent with the approach. We can see good heel toe contact there, where he could get a good push, unlike the other athlete. Right. So that was something he did extremely well, coming off of that and getting a good heel toe rolling contact so he could push well. All right. Whew. All right. So that's it. Any questions for the good of the order?
Does it have to be over yet, Rob? That's great stuff, man.
I will stop recording and then we can chat.